Good morning, kids. I hope you're ready to study God's Word again this morning. This morning we're going to be studying out of the Old Testament. We're going to talk about Gideon. We're going to finish our study of Gideon that we started last week. Remember how the Israelite people had started disobeying God, and God had sent the Midianite people to punish the Israelite people. But they finally started praying to God again, and they started asking for help, and God answered their prayers. So he appeared to Gideon, and he told Gideon that he wanted Gideon to lead an army against the Midianites. But Gideon wasn't sure this was God, and he wanted to make sure, so he asked for a sign. He asked God that if he put a fleece, a piece of wool out in the field, the next morning the fleece would be wet and the ground would be dry. Then he would know it was God, and that's exactly what happened. The fleece was wet and the ground was dry. But Gideon wasn't sure, so he said, hey, God, I want to put the fleece back out there, but this time I want the fleece to be dry and the ground to be wet. And the next morning it was. So Gideon checked it, and he was sure it was God, so he gathered up an army. And he's probably feeling pretty good about himself because he had a lot of men, and he also had God's promise to help him fight and win this battle. But this wasn't what God had in mind. He told Gideon, he said, Gideon, you got too many men. If you beat the Midianite people now, you'll think you did it on your own, and you'll think you didn't have to have God's help. So I want you to make the army smaller. And so God told Gideon, he said, go out to the army and tell everyone, he said, anyone who's afraid may go home now. Did you know that 22,000 men left? That's a lot of men. More than half the army went home. Only around 10,000 stayed. Well, Gideon still felt pretty good. I mean, they had 10,000 men, right? Well, not for long. The Lord told Gideon, he says, you still got too many men. So he said, listen, when they go down to the water to get a drink, I want you to look at the way they drink their water. I want you to see whether they drink their water like a dog, which means they lay on their belly and lap the water with their tongue, or if they kneel on their knees and drink the water from their hand. Okay? And what God was trying to make Gideon see was the men who kneeled on their knees and drank water of the hand were being very cautious. They were making sure and looking around to make sure that they weren't being attacked. But the men who threw themselves on their belly and drank like dogs, they weren't paying attention. They were more interested in getting their water than they were knowing what was going on around them. And that's what Gideon did. It's surprising. Out of the 10,000 men he had, only 300 men got on their knees and drank the water from their hands. All the rest looked silly because they dropped on their belly and drank the water like dogs. You want to do that? Lay on your belly and act like you're drinking like a dog, and then get on your knees and take your hand and go. That's what those men did. They laid on their belly, most of them. Only 300 drank like this. The rest laid on their belly and drank like dogs. So God said, take these 300 and fight the Midianite army. And everybody else goes home. This way, if the Israelite people win, they'll know that it was God that controlled it. They'll know that God was in charge because there's only 300 men. Okay? Gideon didn't know how God was going to help him win. There were so many Midianite people against the 300, so he was worried, and he didn't get any sleep. So God decided to make Gideon feel better. During the night, the Lord spoke to Gideon and says, if you're still afraid that I'm going to help, that's a hard sentence. If you're still afraid that I'm not going to help you win, go down the valley with your servant Purah where the Midianites are staying and listen to what they're saying. You're going to feel better. Guess what Gideon did? He still was afraid, but he snuck Purah and went down to the Midianite camp. Just as he arrived, he heard one of the Midianite people talking, one of the soldiers talking to a friend. He said, hey, I had a dream last night that a round loaf of bread came rolling into our camp. It came so fast that it ran right over one of our tents and made it fall over. And his friend said, this must mean the sword of Gideon and that God will help him defeat the Midianites. So this was a sign. This Midianite soldier had a dream about a big loaf of bread that ran over the camp. And then the other soldier thought, that must mean that Gideon's going to win. Well, as soon as Gideon heard that, he worshiped God. And he ran back to the camp. He said, "Get up, the Lord is going to give us the Midianite camp." And he divided his men into 3 groups. And he gave them all trumpets and empty jars with torches inside. So they got a trumpet and they got a jar with a torch, a fire light on a stick inside. And they surrounded the camp in 3 groups. Remember, they were up high looking down. And when Gideon started to blow his trumpet, everybody started blowing their trumpet. And they started yelling, "For the Lord and for Gideon." Then they broke the jars they were carrying, holding the torches with one hand and the trumpet in the other. And they were yelling, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." They were blowing their trumpets. They held their torches up high. And when the Midianite people heard that, when the Midianite soldiers heard that, they started yelling and running around. And then all the trumpets started again. And the Lord caused the Midianites to start freaking out. And they started running around with each other and at each other with their swords. And the rest that got away were captured by the men of Ephraim by the Jordan, because Gideon had sent messengers ahead to let them know they were coming. That day, God saved Gideon and defeated the Midianite people. Without God, this wasn't possible. I hope you learn a lesson from this. I hope you learn that you don't need to worry. With God, anything is possible. Think about it. God made Gideon reduce his army to 300 men. And with only 300 men, Gideon defeated the entire Midianite army. That's God's power. God has the ability to do whatever he wants because he is our God. So don't worry. Trust in God. Be faithful. I hope to see you soon. But until then, we'll talk on video and we'll continue to talk about lessons from the Bible. And I hope you learn. Love you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.